Time for some differential work. Welcome back. Thanks for watching. I really do appreciate it. This video is going to be a fairly long one, so I won't have four-wheeling at the end of this one. But for those of you who want to just learn basic setup for differential gears on a Jeep, this may be a good one to watch. What I am working on today is a 2016 Jeep JK Rubicon. So this is a 2016 Rubicon Dana 44 rear axle. To get started, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the video draining fluid. You do have to pull out the axles, remove the rear brake assemblies to get to the guts of this. Now, from what I understand, he's hearing some crunchy noises back here, so I'm not just going to drain the fluid. I'm going to catch some of this fluid so I can see what's in it. And I also want to be able to, if there's chunks, I want to be able to kind of forensically figure out what the failure point was here. I'm not seeing a lot of chunks coming out with the fluid, but I will also, while I'm doing this, give you a word of caution. Be very careful with the ABS brake sensors. I pull them completely out, that way I don't ding them, but the harnesses on these are real finicky too, and the wires like to break. So just be aware of that when you're pulling them apart. Be careful or be ready to replace them. It's about 50-50 when I'm doing them. I'm looking at the old gears and I'm looking at the contact pattern, and I am above the root, so the height of the pinion depth in the root is good, and I've got an area on the crown of the tooth where it's not rubbing. So that tells me that the pinion depth is set correct. And then I look at it on the drive and the coast side to determine that my current pinion depth is set correct. The other thing I do is I just kind of give a feel as to how the backlash feels, and that feels pretty good. Now I'll bring the camera back in when I pull this carrier out. There are teeth missing on the pinion, and that's going to be the conclusive piece of the picture as to why these broke. Now, what I'm impressed with is you can see some dents in these ring gear teeth, but all the way around, not one tooth is missing. So now I got to start looking elsewhere besides just the ring gear. Another quick caution, Rubicons have this pigtail. You can buy the little piece that always breaks. Be real careful. They'll usually come out okay. Also, make sure you mark your bearing caps. Bearing caps are line board. These are directional. Now I'm going to see how much preload is on this carrier. I'm really surprised how little preload the newer Jeeps are coming with. It's very rare I have to use a case spreader to remove a carrier anymore. Right now, really hard to see. I'll show you this gear when I get it out. The ring or the pinion gear is intact with the exception of 3 teeth right in a row. Here's one of the teeth right here. As you're taking this apart on the pinion side, you want to make sure you don't have a bunch of slop, which would be evident of either a pinion bearing failure or a crush sleeve that was not crushed down, or spacer, whichever the case may be, that was causing pinion deflection, and that deflection could cause a catastrophic failure too. I've got a nice solid tight pinion. Even after I've taken the pinion nut off, it's still tight. So I'm convinced that I don't have a bearing failure and I don't have a preload or a pinion depth problem at this point. Okay, the pinion is out in my hand, and you can see we have full teeth broken off. We've got a full tooth broken off here. This other tooth that is broken is the lower half. And if you take a pick and you drag it on this third tooth right here, you would notice that this top side, towards the top of the pinion head, has a fracture in it. So I've got the end of one tooth, one full tooth, and the other end of a third tooth starting to fracture. That tells me this is a driveline shock. And it's really not the driver's fault on this. He decided he wanted to run 40-inch tires on this Jeep. It weighs a lot, probably 5,000 to 6,000 pounds. It's got a Dana 44, and then you're turning big tires. So he's not surprised. He's just saving his money for one tons at this point. But you can't sell a junk rear end with junk gears. So no matter what he does, now or later, it's going to have to get repaired. So to talk a little bit about differential theory here, when you're dealing with a high-point gear, which is what these differential gears are, meaning they don't sit face-to-face like this. The pinion sits below. The teeth have a kind of a elliptical pattern to them, or a curve to them. And what that does is, instead of having one tooth in contact with one tooth on your ring gear, you have 3 teeth in contact at any given time. Now, when you get into a situation like this where you have a possible driveline shock, what has happened is either it went forward and rocked back, it went back and rocked forward, spun on some ice and then grabbed traction, something halted movement really quick. And when that happens and it breaks the pinion gear like this, and it breaks 3 teeth in a directional row like that, you can pretty much assure yourself it was drivetrain shock. And like I said, when you have 3 teeth in contact at any given point, it strengthens it a lot, but that also can give you a lot of indications. As one tooth is coming in to the engagement, one tooth is fully engaged and the other tooth is leaving the engagement. So that's how you have those 3 teeth in contact at any given time. This one was pretty solid on that center tooth and pretty solid on the outgoing tooth. The incoming tooth didn't break because it was just on the edge of coming in, and it probably wasn't under as much of a load at this point. We're going to swap these out with a set of Revolution gears. I've been using Revolution the last couple of gear sets I've done for people. So far they set up real nice. We'll see how they set up with this one. I'm going to do a whole bunch of stuff off camera, like go through a half dozen cans of brake cleaner and clean everything out, make sure I don't have any metal. I'm going to swap out bearings and ring gears and stuff like that. You could get away without using a setup kit. He has one. It comes with new bolts. I prefer that. Comes with Loctite. Comes with new spacers and nut for the pinion. Really good idea, because if you use an old pinion, you risk it coming loose. If I use an old pinion, I stake it and Loctite it. I'm really cautious about that. Importantly, it also has a crush lid, so I don't have to worry about using one of mine. You still have to take off this inner bearing so that you can see what shim it is. We're not changing a gear ratio, so we don't have as much issue with pinion depth setup as we would if we were swapping gears. But you still have to set your pinion depth. It doesn't always come out exact, even if you are swapping gears. And personally, this had a little bit of preload. I think I'm going to add some preload to the carrier just for the possibility. It might help it hold up a little better if you can reduce the amount of deflection. When you have a lot of force in the weight of a vehicle and the size of the tire, it really doesn't matter the horsepower. You are creating deflection in there, and the pinion on this is going to deflect because it's not a 3 bearing like a 14 bolt or a 9-inch, so you will get some deflection out of the nose of this. But if I can eliminate any possible deflection out of the ring gear, that might help him prolong the life of his gears a little bit. Hopefully he'll get the 1-tons going pretty soon. All right, time to unbolt the ring gear, and if you have to tap it, it's okay, you're allowed to do that. Just tap the corner, don't hit your carrier. Now the Revolution gears come with 2 different bolt sizes, and the ring gear is drilled for 2 different carriers, so make sure you use the right bolts. You don't want to put this together and have slop in those holes. You want to make sure you use the bigger bolts if it takes the bigger bolts. Your magnetic clutch, electromagnetic clutch. Sometimes, depending on the gears, you have to take that off to get the ring gear over the electrical portion. This particular one you don't, but be careful. You don't want this ring coming down and smacking the clutch assembly. Make sure your hand's there to guard it, block it when that ring drops, and then you can just take it off and put it on. As such. Now I'll start a couple bolts from underneath, and then I'll turn it over and continue installing bolts. This is the part I dislike the most, is torquing ring gears. Mostly on these JKs, it's because their torque spec is 135 pounds. So I initially will go through somewhere around 100, and then I'll go up to the 135. And I'll mark the bolts as I'm going. Now I just do this again at the 135 and put another mark on the bolt so I know where I've gone around. Okay. I went around all the bolts and then I started over 2 bolts just to make sure there was anything. The thing I always look at on the pinions, I look at the numbers that are stamped on the heads, or some of them are also stamped on the sides, but most of them are on the heads. This one has a 438, this one has a 431 plus. So they are different, and this also has a +1 on it. That tells me these are different depth setups. They will not interchange with the existing shim, so I will have to do a shim set. I'm going to install this shim back behind here. That is a good starting point when you are doing these gear swaps. Up until a few years ago, I never had one of these really nice clamshell bearing pullers for differentials. I always used a press and a punch. I like these better than using a press, so if you're doing bearings or pulling them, beg, borrow, or steal, but this is probably one of the best investments I've had in the shop in years. And when you do set this clamshell style puller up, these 2 adjustable thumb stops here, one of them goes to the top of your clamshell, the other one just goes down and rests on the top of your race, and that race is really important for what holds everything together. And you don't have to auger that tight, it just holds the clamshell in place. This is now ready to pull a bearing. And there we go. Got both new race tapped back in. They're press fit basically. Now there are no shims behind this race. A lot of these kits will come with shims that will allow you to put shims behind this race to move the pinion in and out. This particular kit from Revolution uses these shims. Now these shims go behind that bearing on the pinion gear. So I'm going to put the original shim with this pinion gear in, and I'm going to do a pinion pattern check and see where it lands. Then we'll make a decision from there as to what shims I need here. Another little helpful hint, You can use oil or grease, but put some sort of lubricant on your bearings, just in case. Now I'm installing this pinion with the new bearings. I am not installing a crush sleeve, or for that matter, anything in there that would need to be pressed, etc. Of course. Sometimes you have to tap a couple times, get enough thread showing. There we go. Also, use the old nut. Don't use your new nut until final assembly. All I want to do right here is I'm going to grab the impact, I'm going to tighten this down so that there's none of this kind of play in it, and it turns smooth. Make sure you got a couple of turns on this. So I have no up and down play, no side to side play, and I can turn it smoothly. Now I can put my carrier in and run my first pinion depth paint pattern check. All right, I can, got just enough shims to where there's no side to side play in this, but I can slide this in and out really easy. And that's okay because I know I'm gonna have to disassemble this. Right now, I just want the backlash close enough so that I can get a really quality pattern. Now, over here on my electrical for the locker, I'm not going to reassemble that yet because, again, I know I'm going to be in and out with this. So I am going to put it where it's supposed to go so that I don't get anything bound up while I'm doing these checks. Again, make sure you've got your right bearing caps in the right orientation. On this particular one, I've got a single punch mark here and here, and I've got a double punch mark here and a double punch mark on this side. I've got a little bit of play in here. If this binds up, move shims around so that it doesn't. It's okay if this isn't exactly on spec. It might move your pattern up and down a little bit. But right now I am just going to look at pinion depth. Just paint coast and the drive side, 3 or 4 teeth. Don't paint the whole thing all the way around. That's just a mess. Especially if you have to change something. The other thing is, after the ring and pinion roll over this painted area, it'll leave ghost impressions both on the ring gear and on the pinion, and you can look at those and also compare your patterns. Sometimes if the paint is a little thick, it gets a little goopy, harder to read, so keep that in mind too. Now, you want to put some resistance on your ring and pinion. I don't know if I got much resistance on there. It's okay. So I want to put more resistance on what I've got here, even though I've got a fairly decent pattern. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back around to the back. I'm going to snug that pinion up just a little bit more, because remember, I don't have my crush sleeve in there, so I can make this a little more resistance. Right now it turns really easy, and with a camera here it's hard to hold one and move the other. So okay, what do we got here? Okay, see how this line down here at the root is really straight and harsh, and it's soft up here, and we got an angle coming down. All three of those teeth are that same way on the drive side, and not quite as bad of a harsh line on the coast side, but still there's not a soft transition here. So this tells me my pinion gear is just a little bit too close to the ring gear. Now most people will call that too deep, but that's by practical application. By theory, I would move the opposite way and call this too shallow. So again, that's why I'm not using that terminology. I'm using pinion too close, pinion too far, but the pinion is too close. It is riding too deep into the root of the tooth. Now I need to remove a couple of thousandths and move the pinion away from the ring gear. Another word of caution on your new pinion gear: don't beat on the threaded area. I hand thread the old nut on, put a ball peen hammer so it doesn't fall off. Tap it till it comes out of the fit of the bearing. With the nut on, it also doesn't drop the pinion out. Remove the bearing from the pinion. Now, I'm just going to go over this real quick, and I will go into it a little further in depth later. I don't refer to pinion depth as it needs to go deeper or shallower, because I was trained with differential theory. And differential theory is backwards from what practical application of pinion depth is. In theory, we are measuring from the center line of the ring gear to the head of the pinion. When you bring that one direction, it's shallow, the other direction, it's deep. And it is exactly backwards from what you would think. When the actual gear is too far into the gear of the pinion to the ring, people call that too deep, and in differential theory, that's shallow. So I do not qualify pinion too deep or pinion too shallow. I qualify it as the pinion is too close to the ring gear or pinion is too far from the ring. So I've removed this shim, and I have measured it, and I zero my caliper, and now I want to use a combination of these shims that go behind the pinion in this one shim. Now what I'll do is press this bearing back on, assemble it again, and recheck my paint pattern. This is what I don't like about doing this particular type of shim. These shims that go behind the inner bearing, you have to press the bearing off, press it back on multiple times. Whereas when you use the shims that go behind the inner race, it's a little easier, less work with your pullers and presses. So I can do them either way right now. I have enough shims that I could do this in the housing behind that, but since this kit and these gears came this way, I'm going to go ahead and assemble them this way. All right, I got the pinion tightened up some more, so now I'm going to run this back through the painted area, and I've got enough resistance that this is kind of it should make a pretty good pattern. Bring it back around. And now we'll take a look at it. Let's analyze this pattern. All right. You can see it has no harsh lines. It's a nice soft end on both ends from the toe to the heel. Also, if you look, I've got yellow just above the marking point. What that tells me is the tooth is not coming off the tooth. It is contacting on the tooth and leaving some tooth behind. Down here, it is nice and soft. It is not a super harsh straight line where it would indicate that I'm too close to the ring gear with the pinion. So in reality, on the drive side, this is an acceptable pattern. How do we look over here? And we're at about the same on the coast side too. We've got a nice soft pattern coming in and out. I've got yellow above and below the contact pattern. Now, what you don't want to worry about is contact here and here. When you have part of the tooth here or out here and then it's opposite on the other end, that can either be machining or it could be a backlash issue. So at this point, is this a runnable pattern? Yes, it is. Can I improve on this pattern? I believe I can if I want to, and I think I will just because of the tire size he's running. I think because I'm not really centered between the root and the crown, I'm closer to the crown. I think if I add 1 or 2 thousandths, I can drop this pattern a little bit deeper into the root without it going too deep. And what that'll give me is more surface area in the meat of the tooth. Just as a side note, when you're looking at your pattern on your pinion head, it's very similar to what you're looking for on your ring gear. You want smooth transition in and out, and you want it centered on those teeth as best as possible. I generally don't really look at these because they're hard to see once they're in the vehicle. Far easier to just check your pattern on the ring gear. All right, got my paint. Run this back and forth. I've got a lot of load on that pinion bearing, so I'm not in the front holding it, but make sure you have good resistance. All right, my most important angle is going to be my drive side. And I think this is gonna probably be it. I've got a lot of yellow out here, so I know that this tooth is completely engaging. It's not coming off the top of it. And I know the root, I'm pretty close to the bottom, and I really don't have a harsh line at the bottom. And it's smooth coming in and out. Now, I'm betting my backlash is pretty close because it's fairly well centered. Now, my secondary view is going to be the coast side. And the coast side looks actually like the pinion is a little bit too far away. But I changed this 1,000th and it may move. So I might clean this up a little bit and see where I'm at. Okay. Back at the coast side now. I'm centered a whole lot better. I'm smooth coming in and out. Now, I would try to get the gear a little bit further in, but to do that, I would actually screw up the drive side. And you can see the drive side is almost picture perfect. The other thing I'm looking at now is I've now got a ghost pattern, and I really like the ghost pattern that I'm getting. Now that I've got a good pattern, I'm not going to quite take this apart yet to do my finish assembly. I'm going to take a quick measurement on my backlash. Now the spec on these 5-cut gears is 6 to 10 thousandths, and I am dead on the money at 10 thousandths. So technically, this is fine for a final assembly preload. I can leave all my shims where they're at on my side gears. Now, if I want to tighten this up a little bit, I can take a thousandth or two out of this side and put it in this side, which will move the rig gear a little bit closer and give me a little bit tighter specification. I'm not really wanting to do that because 10 is within specifications. But what I am going to do, because I can right now remove this carrier and put it in without any really preload on these side bearings, and I want some preload there. I've run into this a lot on these newer differentials. They just fall out. I really think you need preload, because if for some reason you have some deflection in here when it pushes into that bearing, that can cause a gear failure as well. So what I'm going to do now when I do this for a final assembly, I'm going to add 1 or 2 thousandths over here so that it really fits in tight. And if I have to, I can put my case spreader on and slide it in if I have to use some real thin shims. But I want to tighten this up, and I'm only going to tighten it up by putting shims on this side, which will theoretically split the difference on that shim left to right as it's creating preload. And this will probably bring my backlash down to probably 8 or 9 thousandths, which would be even better. So now I'm going to take everything apart and get it ready for a final assembly. Now that I'm getting ready for final assembly, I will want my new crush sleeve. I'm going to use the new washer and the new nut when I torque it down. I have already measured my side gear or side shims for the backlash, so we'll see about that. I'm also going to install the new seal. Always install your new seal before final assembly. Once you crush your crush sleeve, it is a one-time deal. There are ways of faking it around it, but do it once, then you don't have to worry about it. Anytime I have a choice, I will use a crush sleeve eliminator. That way, if I have to replace a pinion seal, I don't have to worry about a crush sleeve. I don't have to worry about either shimming this or spreading it. Keep that in mind. Final assembly is final assembly. Crush sleeve is a one-time use only. All right, now I'm going to go get the new washer behind the new bearing, which is already in the housing. I'll install the seal, then I'll start getting the pinion ready to go. I've got 4 or 5 threads on my new nut, yokes on, seals in, washer, bearing, crush sleeve, everything is in here. This is final assembly. Now, the torque spec on the preload of this is like 22 inch-pounds on new bearings. So you can use an impact or do it by hand. Doing it by hand gives you more control. If you've got some experience, go for it with an impact. But what I initially do is I get all this play out with a 1/2 inch impact, and then to finish crushing the sleeve, a lot of times I'll do it by hand, a lot of times I'll do it with a breaker bar. But first thing I'm going to do is get this snugged up just with the 1/2 inch impact. And you can tell when it finally starts grabbing and tightening stuff up. Okay, that's all the tighter I can go with my 1/2 inch impact. Now I'll go with the 3/4 inch impact, or from here, I would go tighten it by hand. Now is where it gets tough, because you got to initially start crushing that slave. Once it starts to crush, it goes fast, so got to be real careful. I can kind of feel this gun moving a little easier, so I know it's starting to crush. Probably a 1/4 turn and it'll be where I need it. It's almost there. Okay, now all of the play is out of it. It's really light, really easy, really smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and check it with an 1-pound wrench, and I bet I'll have to move that nut maybe that far and it'll be done. I've only got a couple of 1-pounds, so I'm just right at that very beginning of crushing this slave. Now the spec is 22 to 35 inch-pounds. So you don't want to overdo this. Right now I'm at 10. Whoa, right on the edge. That is at 30 inch-pounds right there. So this is as tight as I want it to go. You can feel some resistance, but it's smooth. It's easy to turn. Right on the money at 30. So this is done. This is a finished section. Do not touch this again. Don't tighten it, don't loosen it, it's done. I think I will get some sandpaper and clean up my plier marks, but other than that, done. This is the plunger that indicates you're in locker or non-locker mode, and this plunger has to be this direction when you install the carrier. So I put a little wire connector to push this out. It's got a string attached, and it'll go behind the carrier. I'll install the carrier, torque it down, and then I'll pull the string, and then the plunger will be on the correct side of the electromagnetic clutch. So big trick for those of you trying to do this for your first time. You have to pull the carrier out to do that. So do this ahead of time. Because I want to tighten this up, and I still want to be able to get this in without too much difficulty, I went ahead and put a case spreader on here. I've got my string and my plunger set. Now, gotta get everything lined up correctly.
fishing the wiring through the access holes sometimes gets a little tight, but make sure you do that before you put the cap on.
A little bit of play. And then always take the spreader off. Take a measurement. We're at 7,000, spec 7 to 10 or 6 to 10 on this. 7 will keep that gear pushed into the pinion hard. I've got a lot of extra tension from preload, which I think is a better way to go. That way you won't get any deflection in the carrier. Now I'm going to take the case spreader off and make sure everything turns okay. After you pull the string out, you can look through the top of your differential and see that plunger, and you need to make sure it is on the left side of that flat plate. If it's on the right side of that plate, you missed it. So that's what the reason I put that little connector to push that plunger out for. Don't forget to pull the string out for your plunger. And I would definitely recommend checking to make sure the light comes on before you put everything together. The only thing I have left to do now is torque the bearing caps to 80 foot-pounds. I've got them torqued to about 35 with that little impact. It won't change anything on the pattern, so I'm going to torque these and then take a final reading on everything. Dial indicator 0 to 7, so I'm comfortable with 7,000, spec 7 to 10 or 6 to 10 on this. Now that I have my 7,000s, I've repainted my gears. I'm going to run them back through a few times and make sure nothing changes. I should get a better pattern with the backlash set to specs. And let's see, I'll have to move the camera in here now. There you go. That's just about as picture perfect as you can get on the drive side. And same thing on the coast side. Centered, smooth in, smooth out. I got some gear on the top, some gear in the root. This one's a winner. All right, everything's done in here. All I got to do is axles, drive shaft. Put the cover on, let the glue dry a little bit before you fill it. You'll avoid leaks that way. And this one is going to be ready to go now. All right, axle shafts are back in, covers on, filled with fluid, ready to go. A couple real quick things for review. When you're getting your pinion ready to set up, don't use your crush sleeve or your seal until it is your final installation, after your pinion depth is set. Make sure you set your pinion depth first, otherwise none of the other measurements are really going to matter, because it won't work right and it'll be noisy and it'll wear things out. So don't think of pinion depth as deep and shallow. Think of it as how close or how far away the pinion is to the ring gear. That'll save you a lot of headaches and brain damage. Also, most of these newer Jeeps, the carriers that I've been doing these, they almost fall out instead of having much preload on the bearings. I'm still a fan of putting some preload on the bearings. I actually used the case spreader on this just to open it up 1,000th, so that I didn't have to worry about folding shims, and I still tap them in a little bit. But if you have to tap those side shims in for your backlash, you've got some preload on the bearings, you're probably fine there. You don't want to have to gorilla hammer them in, because then you're putting excessive load on them. But if you just lightly have to tap those shims in to get the carrier to seat, that's probably just fine. I would definitely take that over the carrier falling out in my lap. If the carrier is coming out that easy, you can be assured that it is getting some deflection as it is getting pushed under a load. So the more you can do to save yourself from having to do it twice, the better off you are. If you have any questions, throw them in the comments. I'm happy to answer anything I can. And as usual, please like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for watching.